Hello, I am Dr. Paul Convery, Clinical Professor of Healthcare Leadership and Management at the Jindal School of Management at the University of Texas at Dallas. Today I will discuss how to gain improvements in the emotional intelligence competencies. This is part of the Masters of Science in Healthcare Leadership and Management degree program and is in the coursework for the section on competencies of effective healthcare leaders. Let's start by reviewing what we mean by emotional intelligence competencies. We will use this four-quadrant approach, which has already been discussed in the classroom. This material is adapted from Daniel Goleman's work on emotional intelligence. In the upper left quadrant, we have self-awareness. Emotional self-awareness is the foundational core of emotional intelligence. One must be aware of how one responds to emotions, stress, anxiety, threats, and other external stimuli. One must realize how others perceive our responses and be very aware of our own physical reactions. This may be anything from stiffening up and crossing our arms in a defensive posture to reacting loudly and inappropriately. Emotional self-awareness is fundamental. In the lower left quadrant, we have self-management. This follows on self-awareness. Once one realizes how one responds, it is our responsibility to manage the response. This may range from basic control of our emotional outbursts to remaining positive and optimistic about new ideas. It may mean to become more adaptable. On the right side of the chart, we have our responses to the organization. Begin in the upper right quadrant with empathy and organizational awareness. Just as self-awareness is fundamental to self-management, empathy and organizational awareness is fundamental to relating to others and to the organization. One must understand not only the feelings, emotions, and needs of individuals, but also the culture, the politics, and the reward system of our organizations. The lower right side of the chart contains all the organizational skills required to lead successfully in organizations. Teamwork, influence, mentoring, and leading change are all part of the essential work of anyone in a leadership role. And being as competent as possible in the emotional intelligence competencies will lead us to a more successful and satisfying leadership experience. In the case study that you have just finished, you became familiar with Dr. Jackson, a person with some relationship issues and some deficiencies in some of the emotional intelligence competencies. And as you have completed a profile on these emotional intelligence competencies, and thus you have at hand some issues or behaviors for Dr. Jackson that should be corrected. For this part of the exercise, you are his supervisor, and he is a skilled and valuable person that would benefit from your counsel and advice. You want to help him improve. Now, first, let's look at three approaches that you could take. The first is teaching. You are all familiar with teaching. You have been to years of school, and you have probably had the opportunity to teach others over the years. Teaching provides a framework for understanding and learning based on the objective body of knowledge. I will teach you how to fill out the report forms that are required for the payroll. You are literally telling someone or showing someone how to do something that is fairly objective. And as far as you're concerned, there is only one way to do it. This is not an ideal or an effective model for improving emotional intelligence competencies because they are behavior issues and they're very personal. It is difficult to teach someone how to be empathic. You can explain what it means and give examples, but teaching does not usually work in improving these behavior areas. The second approach is mentoring. This is defined as sharing your personal knowledge or experience with another to advance their understanding or effectiveness. The key here is that you are advancing their understanding of the behavior and how they can be more effective. You are still giving some general direction, and the advice is usually based on your own personal experiences. However, it is not as directional as teaching, and you're leaving plenty of room for one to find their own way. The example is, I find that it is best to fill out the report forms at the end of each day and consolidate them for each pay period. Most of you are familiar with mentoring and have used it or have been mentored in the past. It comes pretty naturally to us most of the time. The third approach is coaching. This does not come as naturally for us and takes some thought and practice. Coaching is the art and the science of facilitating self-directed change. The key word here is self-directed. The person being coached must discover the behavior and how to improve it, how to make the change. It is, however, a collaborative process in which the coach's role is to help the person think through their situation with greater depth and clarity than they would do on their own, and then to assist them in discovering their own solutions. The key is self-discovery. The example given is, why would you think that you are not being paid? What could you do differently? How could you approach this differently? Coaching, as it turns out, is the most effective way of improving emotional intelligence competencies in another and making sure that the behavior change sticks. The second most is mentoring, or a combination of the two. Now, as you can imagine, both coaching and mentoring are more effective if there is a genuine relationship between the coach or the mentor and the subject. This is especially true in coaching. This does not mean in any way to imply that teachers do not have to be authentic with their students. The more authentic and genuine the teachers are, the better the experience is, and we have all experienced that. But we have also learned algebra, organic chemistry, or basic grammar from teachers that we did not particularly like or that liked us. It is different with mentoring and coaching. The quality of the mentoring or coaching is directly correlated to the quality of the relationship between the mentor or coach and the subject. An authentic connection and rapport should be established based on a shared sense of humility, self-awareness, integrity, openness, empathy, and generosity. Sometimes in a supervisor-employee relationship that is not easy, but do the best that you can. The more authentic that you can be, the better the mentoring or coaching will be. Otherwise, mentoring and coaching are just forced training, often on an unwilling subject. Here are some critical questions to ask of the one that you are coaching or mentoring. What are you trying to achieve or accomplish? Ask the person to put in their own words what they perceive as the emotional intelligence competency gap or other behavior that they are trying to correct, and their own description of what an ideal behavior would be like. This may take some time and some probing to have them come up with an accurate description for you. Ask open-ended questions and not directive questions. An example response that someone being coached might give is, I'm trying to stop this behavior. I often lose control of my emotions and become visibly angry during staff meetings whenever the finance officer is reviewing my budget. I should stay calm and relaxed in answering the questions that are posed. The next question is, what are you doing well? Allow them to acknowledge that they are doing many things well and that this session is to help them improve or reach their goals. Try to keep them from becoming defensive about their behavior. So that response then may be something like this. When the other staff members ask about my department, I focus on them. I take notes and answer appropriately. I do not lose control of my emotions with the other staff members. Something about the finance officer really sets me off. The next question is, what should you try to change? Do not try to boil the ocean. Keep the items that they may want to change down to 1 or 2 items at a time. Otherwise, they'll be totally overwhelmed and lose focus. Do not make the change too much for them. So in this example, the response may be, I need to stop this reaction to the finance officer when my budget is challenged. My behavior needs to be more neutral and more engaged in the discussion. I must learn not to react as I have been doing. Our next question will be, what will you change to achieve your goals? This will make the plans to change more definitive and specific and not vague. Keep narrowing it down to specific actions that they will choose. Identify the trigger. Identify the trigger that stimulates the behavior. So a response may be, I need to specifically be able to interact in a non-confrontational way with the finance officer. Maybe I need to stop thinking of his question as a challenge. Maybe thinking of it as a challenge is that trigger. And maybe I should think of it as just a quest for information. The next question is, do you have a plan to implement the change? Help them become aware of specific signals that may trigger a reaction and behavior, and be forewarned about them. Again, try to be specific. So the response may be something like this. In order to stop my reaction, I must first stop thinking of the finance officer's inquiry as a challenge, and instead think of it as a simple question. I will prepare for the meetings by reviewing my department budget with my own finance staff, practice answering questions with them, and have a few points that I can discuss. I'll also put a note on my agenda to remind me to stay calm, so that when I sit in the meeting and see that note, I'll remember that I must always be focused on my behavior. And then finally ask, how can I help you? What can you or others do to help with this? Examples, you may give feedback on a periodic basis. So the response may be, will you specifically observe my behavior in these meetings, and then spend 5 minutes with me after each meeting to give me immediate feedback on my behavior? Now, this is a very basic example of how these questions can be used effectively in mentoring or coaching for emotional intelligence competencies improvement.